My decision to start a self-pleasure practice fundamentally changed my entire life. And it came at a point where I had been struggling with porn addiction and premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction. Like, I used to be a sexual mess when I was younger. I watched porn regularly. I ejaculated to porn regularly. It impacted my romantic relationships. It impacted my success in business or lack thereof in my previous business. And I was just like a lost person, wishing that I had somebody to guide me. Sort of like, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, right? So at a certain point, I came to this workshop and they said, okay, for a month, you're going to self-pleasure without fantasy. You're going to self-pleasure without porn. You're just going to dive into what it actually feels like to be in a body and do that for the sake of a practice. And I had paid money for this. So I was like, fuck it. Okay, I guess I'm going to do this. I guess I'm really not going to fantasize about the threesome or the whatever. And I thought I had broken myself. And what I mean by that is it took me almost 3 weeks without watching porn or without fantasizing to actually be able to get an erection again, actually by just reconnecting with my own body and developing a relationship with this sort of internal generative system instead of like an externally stimulated system. Took me a while and I thought I broke myself and it was really concerning. But luckily I had somebody who was there saying, hey, by the way, just keep doing this. Just keep breathing. Just keep exploring what feels good, even in your neck and your arms. Eventually your sexual response system is going to come back online and it's going to be stronger and more powerful than you've experienced before and more grounded and more unwavering. That's what happened to me, which was amazing. But it was going through a period of time of like not knowing if that was going to happen or not. And I say that because there's a lot of guys when they start doing an actual self-pleasure practice, they can't get aroused or they think something's wrong with them or they think they're doing it wrong. But really, no, you're training your brain, you're training your whole nervous system to actually start to experience pleasure without the need for a highly stimulating porn video or a fantasy. And that's a huge thing because of the context of the society that we're living in. So what that will do over time, if you start doing an extended self-pleasure practice on a regular basis, I say at least 20 minutes at a time, at least 3 times a week, your body starts to understand, your penis starts to understand, your brain starts to understand that sex is not just about like, and if you're listening, I just made my hand go up and down and my body sat still. And then I did an ejaculation motion.
I believe that's the international symbol for jerking off.
Yes. Yes. As most of us men have done, it's just, oh, let's just rub it out in a couple minutes, boom, ejaculate, done, get the pleasure hit, move on to the next thing. If you keep doing that repeatedly, your body is just going to have that association with arousal. And then of course that's going to happen in the sexual experience too. But if you self-pleasure for longer over time, as you know, your body can start to relax into the experience of sexual pleasure. And then beyond that, your body realizes ejaculation is not the goal of the sexual experience, at least not the immediate goal. So then you can start to open doors of other kinds of orgasmic pleasure in there when you go for longer. There's something around the like 10-minute mark or so, at least for me, when I make it to that point, there's a shift that happens in my system to where my body isn't going towards ejaculation in the same way. Like there's a relaxation that happens, and if anyone listening has ever done meditation or something, there's a point when you're meditating where the brainwaves switch. There's a different sort of program that takes over and you're like, oh, I'm here now. That's what happens to me. And that's what can happen with an extended self-pleasure practice. It might not happen the first time or the third time or the 6th time, but that's why they call it a practice. This is something to do over time to build your skill set. And it's really interesting in our society how for some reason sex doesn't fall into this category of what most people think is a skill they could develop. Like if you want to learn jujitsu, you go study jujitsu and you train your ass off for a long period of time. And then you're still a white belt, Somehow we think, oh, I should just take a workshop and in a week be really good at sex. But no, our nervous system needs time to adjust to this.
Yeah. And there's a hidden reason behind that. Like I've just thought of this recently, right? Of like, why don't we think of sex as something that we can work on? If you think about what happened in Europe, right? I'm obsessed with this, why did we get so sexually repressed in Europe, right? And the Catholic Church, if you think about it, was like, we have to lock down people's sexual sovereignty. We have to lock down their ability to find their way into mystical states of consciousness. We have to control them to a degree that they will come to church every single Sunday and believe that what we tell them is the only truth, and then tithe 10% of their income, right? And if we want to keep this organization, right, which was not original Christianity, if we want to keep the organization of the church, right, one of the largest I think it still is the largest private landholder in the world, right? If we want to keep this going, we can't let people find their way to magic, to mysticism, to energy activation, to God states of consciousness. So what happened was a war on drugs, right? Keep plant medicine out of people's hands, and a war on sexuality and a war on women. Because women remember a little bit more easily than men when it comes to sexuality, but both of them have forgotten. So when as a society, we're like, oh, you don't work on your sexuality, right? It's not just that we don't have that concept as society. It's that there was an actual campaign to be like, don't you dare fucking look in that box. Don't look in the box of drugs. Don't look in the box of mystical practices. Do not look in the box of your own sexuality, right? Yes. Can it be so programmed, habitual, and disconnected that you don't dare find your way back to God within you, right? And so I say that because when people are like, oh, I don't want sex to be work, it's like doing that work puts you back in the seat of your own power and back in the seat of your own spiritual sovereignty. And the fact that we don't think that we could even work on our sexuality, there are deep hidden control mechanisms in there that we're like, don't ever go looking in that box. And so to have a pleasure practice is like, yeah, you're going to get so much better at sexuality. You're going to reclaim your body and your sovereignty. You can get unaddicted to things like fantasies or porn, but also you're doing something powerful and you are reclaiming a space that has been taken from all of us very intentionally and very systematically.
This is an intangible thing that's important to talk about and kind of hard to talk about. But what happens after you do a self-pleasure practice for an extended period of time is you start to experience reality differently.
Yeah.
As you know, you start to walk in the world differently. You're like, holy shit, this is what's possible. People start to look at you differently. People are like, what's going on with that person? He seems radiant or she seems totally vibrant. I don't know why. Maybe she's figured something out. Is it the coffee? No, probably not the coffee.
It's also the coffee for me.
Sometimes
but
the
twinkle in the eye is more than the coffee.
I guess, but like the important thing to me is in society, in the current society, so many people think sexuality is this little box that's isolated down in our genitals. And for many people it is because of a lot of the things you just said, but it's so much more than that. Our whole body is a sexual organ. Our brain's a sexual organ. And when we start to unlock our sexual power, it impacts everything. It impacts our family relationships, our friendships, our ability to make money, our ability to be creative. Like it impacts all this stuff because it's our life force, and it's so crucial, in my opinion. If you're alive and you want to get the most out of this life, like start doing some work with your sexuality, start realizing this is actually at the core of your being. And it does impact how you show up in the boardroom. It does impact how you show up at work. Like think about it. If you stay up late, masturbating, watching porn, 11 o'clock at night, which by the way, is statistically the most common time men look at porn is around that time of night. Well, you're priming your sleep to have porn images in it. You're also priming your system to have shittier sleep because you're looking at lights late at night and you wake up, you're probably not going to perform as well the next day. What if instead you just did a meditation or you just relax and chose not to get that dopamine hit? Like that's going to have a massive effect, maybe not immediately the next day, but cumulatively over time. It's huge and it'll fundamentally shift society.
Right. And the reason that a pleasure practice is so necessary, and you really touched on this, is that you are rewiring your nervous system. So every single time you masturbate and every single time you have an orgasm, you are hardwiring that pathway into your brain. And so when you have watched porn for years and years and years, when you have masturbated in a certain way for years and years and years, two things happen. Number one, that is the pathway that your body associates with climax. And so it's going to want to get on that pathway. So when you try and change the pathway and say, actually, we're going to get there without porn, we're going to get there without fantasy, we're going to get there by being connected to ourselves. Your body at first, as with any new pattern, is like, oh, hell no, right? Like that sounds like a lot of energy input. That's unknown, right? And so you have to give yourself that time to change your pattern. You also have to give yourself the time to build new neural networks, because the network, as you're describing, when you feel really numb inside, you weren't feeling that much, right? Women go through the same thing. When I train women, it's like if they've been fantasizing about the same thing their whole life, if they've touched their clitoris the same way their whole life, if they've been out of their body and in their heads fantasizing to feel themselves or to try a different position, it's like they won't feel anything for a long time. That's literally because the neural network does not exist between that experience and orgasm or pleasure in your brain. So you have to conscientiously build it. It's not always comfortable. That's why a pleasure practice gives you that space to, number one, unhook from the known pathways, which can actually feel addictive, to the unknown pathways, which is uncomfortable, right? If you're just with a lever all the time or doing the same masturbation all the time, you're just gonna be like, fuck it, right? When you create that pleasure practice space, you're like, okay, I'm retraining my body, right? You give yourself that space and you hold the intentionality. You also need to do it frequently, like you're saying, to reprogram yourself. And number two, you can also learn new techniques, right? When we're like, learn how to breathe, if you just try that all of a sudden with a lever, it's probably going to be too much. You want to learn how to breathe on your own.
Totally.
You're also going to start to heal when you do a pleasure practice. You're going to trigger emotions, feelings, healing releases. It is easier to learn to do that on your own at first before you do it with a partner. So the pleasure practice is just so essential for so many reasons.
Yeah. Pleasure practice.
Yeah. It's like going to the gym for your sexuality.
And you can discover all kinds of things that you might never have thought that you would like. Maybe you like butt plugs and you didn't know.
Yeah.